Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We are tonight, of course, on a Tuesday, talking about the latest in the United States as far as the next couple of weeks is concerned on the weather side. And as we usually do, we will then go on Thursday to the European side of the discussion and talk about the next couple of weeks for those folks. You're going to find that with both of these discussions, there isn't much change to what we have talked about. There really is not anything new that I'm going to provide. The forecast still remains as such, which is we are expecting the northern United States for these next couple of weeks to really have the best opportunity at some of those below normal temperatures. And then the southern United States is expected to see a little bit more of a reprieve from the cold and back towards these above normal temperature regimes. So we're going to be pretty much reinforcing what we talked about here the last week and a half, but I am also going to show you some additional products that I think you'll find rather interesting. Before I even dive into that, there is one thing I want to go over with all of you, and that is I see a lot of times on Twitter, on Facebook, any social media platform that is disseminating weather, people just posting runs of models. Anybody can do that. And the only reason why I'm calling this out is because I especially see this on the nat gas side. It's common sometimes to see it in meteorology where people will, talk about, for example, oh, this new run is showing X amount of snowfall for Chicago, or, something that's real anomalous. Then people will bring it up. But mentioning like a run-to-run change, I know it really does dictate price movement, especially as it relates to nat gas. But just talking run to run doesn't give you a full context of where we're going. If I was just regurgitating what changed between the 12Z and the 18Z, there really is no need for me, because all I'm doing is just telling you information that is already readily accessible to you. So why I'm going on this diatribe tonight is because I have seen this a lot recently. Here's an example. There's been people talking about just the last couple runs being more bearish, right? And they could go more bullish. By the way, none of that conversation has taken place in the Discord. I'm not calling anybody out that's currently subscribed. Don't take that the wrong way. I'm mainly talking about people outside of the walls of Energy Rogue that are, saying, well, these last two runs have been bearish. And, who knows? Maybe the next couple of runs, maybe the 0 or the 12Z is going to be bullish, right? So I want to really draw attention to that, because I understand, once again, that the run-to-run variation does have, in some cases, or in many cases, significant impact on the price of nat gas when it comes to trading. It can, right? And we've seen that. But part of the reason why I'm here is to at least give you context, is to go beyond just the run-to-run weather models and actually understand what the parameter space is that we're in right now and where we're going based off of not just model data, but current conditions and observations. Because you see, in meteorology, it's not just about models. It's about observational data. In meteorology, we call it in situ. And so I also don't want you to take my comments as if I'm Nostradamus. I am the one that gets it right 98% of the time. Not the case at all. And I've had conversations with many of you who are subscribed to Energy Rogue. By the way, be sure to subscribe, energyrogue.com, if you haven't already. Quick plug. I've had many conversations with you about folks in the meteorology community who I actually recommend. Mr. Lanza is one of them. I think first name's Matt Lanza. I always get the first name wrong. Matt Lanza. Excellent voice in the weather community. Anytime he has something to say, I listen. Same goes for many of you here that I've had a chance to meet. Right? Anytime I get to learn from you too, I listen. And he's one of those voices in meteorology that I respect. James Spann is another one I respect. As crazy as Reed Timmer is, I respect him. There's a lot of voices in the weather community and a lot of insight. Former professors of mine, professors at the universities that I'm always following to give me validation on what I'm looking at. But then also if I'm missing something, right, totally overlooked a feature out west or somewhere in the United States, it makes me think. Right? So the learning never stops with me, and because of that, I'm not somebody that is just going to rely on a weather model. People that do that, I am very speculative if they're even meteorologists. That's not a crapping on anybody, so to speak. But if you are just simply looking at a change and going, oh, okay, yeah, let me go to the 12Z, and let me take a look at the mean temperature. Okay, here's the changes here. That's great. Again, nat gas price, important. But if you're just using it to tell a story, that doesn't give you the full picture. And, I go back to much of the commentary I've seen on Twitter about the last two runs have been bearish. Well, in my opinion, those two runs that were bullish, I didn't really buy it. It didn't make sense. Because, once again, we're coming off a pattern that featured a really ample high pressure across the northern Pacific, very ample, almost above normal for the Pacific high. That can't sustain itself. That's something that if you were part of the discussion on Thursday at our weather office hours, we talked about extensively. And even models then were showing a pretty bearish picture. They were showing a split regime, which makes sense because we are at the peak of La Nina climatologically. We are heading into February. And as we head into February, yes, we can still experience cold. It is still a winter month. But we also have to keep in mind that we are also coming off of a really ample Pacific high, which is scheduled to flatten and become zonal. You have to take that into account. What we saw the last couple of weeks, folks, was so anomalous. 10 inches of snow across the Panhandle. Wildfires in Los Angeles and Ventura County, the likes of which we've never seen in that area's history. So we really have to think about what we've observed and where we're going. Runs are going to change. But if you have in mind where we're going and you take a look at the full picture, not just, again, models, but observational, and you really get a full picture of your forecast, it really helps to smooth out some of those outliers. One of the things we also talk about, too, is the ensembles, right? Don't just use one singular solution. Nikitas, great question during office hours on Thursday. He asked, hey, I use these different weather models. I see you just using the GFS, for example, in this discussion. Is it okay to use other models? Absolutely it is. And it's even better when you know how each of these models work and how they perform relative to what you're trying to forecast for. Remember that the ensembles are meant to give you an average. They're meant to smooth out those extremes, which can be a good and a bad thing depending on what you're forecasting. If we are forecasting an extreme event, do you want to necessarily use an ensemble 3-4 days out? It's a catch-22. It may actually underdo an event that we would suspect to be on the abnormal side. Vice versa, if you take a look at the GFS or the European model, or really any one of the singular solutions that we look at here at Energy Rogue, it also has its pros and cons too. The pro is that, it is a singular solution, and it actually can help to amplify, in some cases, some anomalous conditions we're expecting to happen. But just like with the ensemble, that also acts as a negative. Do you want to just use one singular solution? So it's kind of a catch-22 with these models. And the last thing I'll really kind of drive home here, and I'll continue to each and every one of you that watch this channel, there is no such thing as a silver bullet in meteorology. There is not one weather model, there is not one methodology that I can point to and say that it will forecast at a 95% accuracy 30 days out. It just will not happen. Our atmosphere is a fluid. It's dynamic. Think of a fluid like water, because water is a fluid, right? Think about a lake. Think about a river. Imagine throwing a rock across that river. What's that going to do? It's going to ripple. But each time you do that, it's not going to be constant. You're not going to see the same ripple. It's not going to always land in the same spot. It's not always going to have the same reaction. That's the same thing conceptually with meteorology. That's what makes it so difficult to forecast. As a matter of fact, let's also not forget that we have come a long way in this field to even be able to model out a couple of weeks and even give us some sense of what the weather could be down the line. All diatribes aside, Wanted to make sure I got that out there. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask those. Again, we really got into some hot topics tonight in the weather community. What was kind of grinding my gears a little bit, and I wanted to give you a little bit of some insight on the meteorology perspective. Hopefully that all made sense and you could understand that from my perspective. All right, so as I was going through my diatribe, I did realize that we clicked off a map that I really wanted to show off to all of you tonight, because there really isn't much change to the forecast. Not to say that there isn't anything happening. You can never say that in weather. There's no such thing as nothing. But we haven't seen much change in the models other than that they continue to remain bearish. So what I took the liberty of doing is pulling this map. This is still our jet stream, so let's just kind of take this one piece at a time. We're looking at the 500 millibar height. This is our jet stream, right? So first thing we always start with. But you notice we're seeing a little bit of a different look to it. So each one of these numbers here is what's known as GPM. GPM stands for geopotential meters. It is another measurement that we use for height and in some way correlated to pressure. Now, don't get necessarily hung up on that, but ultimately what this is doing is this is a spaghetti plot. So think back to hurricanes, whenever we're forecasting out hurricanes, you see those spaghetti plots, right? The 20 to 30 different solutions that are trying to show you all the different directions of possibility that the hurricane could go. Well, we do the same thing for our jet stream, believe it or not. Not well advertised, but we do. And similar to the ensembles, when trying to forecast temperature, we use this as a gauge to give us an idea of what the jet pattern looks like over the next couple of weeks and what's the confidence that we have in that. You're also going to find some fun stuff as we get towards week 2. You'll see here in a moment. So, as we get towards Wednesday, I want you to keep an eye on this feature out towards the northern Pacific. We keep referencing it, and we've really talked about this the last week and a half, and that is the Pacific High, the catalyst that has allowed for those really anomalous conditions across the United States over these last couple of weeks. As we mentioned in our really long-winded diatribe to start things off tonight, I'll even call it a monologue, we were really talking about the idea that that high pressure, this amplified ridge, is going to eventually become a little bit more zonal and allow for sort of a west to east jet stream, keeping half of the country relatively mild, half of the country remaining cold. And so keep an eye again on the northern Pacific and watch what happens here as we get towards the weekend. You're noticing the little spaghetti lines are starting to spread out a bit. They're going to get a little bit more chaotic here in just a moment. But the idea I want to drive home tonight is, once again, we see that ridge building across the Gulf of Alaska. Now, you would think, based on everything we've talked about, well, Brendan, amplified high, that should mean cold air, right? Well, not necessarily, because just to the south of that, we also have a Pacific jet that's kicking in this time around, and that's going to essentially couple, meaning it's going to converge between both your polar jet and your Pacific jet, and they are going to form one. That's what we call in some cases, a split flow, but in this case, a jet coupling, right? So for my weather nerds out there that read those AFDs or those forecast discussions from your local National Weather Service, anytime you hear jet coupling mentioned, that is just a fancy term of saying you take two jet streams, you couple them, and converge them right at a point. That's important because what that's going to do is allow for more of a sort of, again, zonal flow across the United States. A tale of two winters, if you will, as we head into what would be the first week of February. And you'll see that here in real time as we get towards that February 5th and 6th time frame. Again, you have still this trough digging down, or an area of low pressure, but because of that Pacific jet, that is actually allowing for areas downstream of that to be above normal, right? So we'd be talking about, again, Texas, Oklahoma, even up towards the Great Lakes region as we get towards that, again, first week of February time frame. And I just noticed, too, my PC sounds like a Boeing 747. Apologize if you can hear that. But as we head towards what would be that second week of February, look at all those colors that are spinning around. that is pretty much chaos, as you see. And I like to really, best analogy for what you're seeing here as we get towards February 12th, it'd be like if a 5-year-old took a crayon and was drawing it all over the map. This is what we call chaos theory. In theory, Chaos theory is the idea that one small change leads to major changes downstream. And because our models, when we get 2 weeks out, tend to make a lot more assumptions, well, because they're making more assumptions than what's observed, you tend to get a lot of this, right? A lot of these lines that are all over the place. Again, looks like a 5-year-old drew all over it. That is telling us that at this point in time, it is incredibly uncertain what the jet pattern looks like or what we could see. And that's important because that ultimately dictates our weather at the surface. So just wanted to show this map because I think it's pretty cool. I get kind of nerded out by it, but ultimately it's another kind of tool in our toolbox that we can look at and show us what the confidence is on the pattern we're going into. I can tell you based on just the GEFS ensemble, we have pretty decent confidence heading into that first week of February, right? We got a subtle ridge kind of remaining out in the northern Pacific. Not necessarily zonal by definition, as we talked about, although that is likely to happen over time as we get towards the middle and the latter half of February. Nonetheless, because of that Pacific jet that kicks in, you get a jet coupling to form, and that allows, rather than for cold air to dump all the way south once again, instead splitting off and demarcating your winter, so to speak, keeping the northern United States cooler, and then the southern United States relatively warmer. Now, just so I don't confuse anybody, I mentioned here about 30 seconds ago that right around that February 6th to 8th time frame, we could possibly see some well above normal temperatures for the Midwest. That is going to be a very short-term thing that's likely to be associated with a strong low-pressure system. So I mentioned that, but overall, if we're looking at the next few weeks of February, and really most of February, I am expecting to see sort of this split seasonal flow. Northern United States remaining below normal, while the southern United States remains above normal. And if we stick with the GEFS and actually show you some of these temperature anomalies, actually, I don't know if we can on here, but if we head over to our good folks over at the Tropical Tidbits, we can look here at the ensemble GEFS and then pull up our temperature anomalies, 5-day average, and this really tells the story, right? So here's that first week of February, beginning February 2nd. Look at this warm plume. And again, a lot of that has to do with a digging trough that's likely going to have a lot of flow pretty much kicking up downstream, very unseasonably warm temperatures because of that polar and then that Pacific jet coupling. That's a really important feature. That is likely going to lead to probably some of the most warm conditions we have seen this winter. Very reminiscent of 2023, the winter of 23 and 24, where we saw 70s for Christmas Day. Very similar to that effect across the Midwest likely, but that is expected to then come down a little bit, especially as we head into what would be this is actually daily. Yeah, this is not weekly. Actually, no, is it? No, it is weekly. Yeah, as we head into what would be, looks like week of February the 7th, the 8th, and 9th. But as we get towards, really, again, that second week of February, so days 9 to 13, look at how you see that cold air, that warm air really subside, and that cold air begin to intrude, right? So, a little bit more of a vertical split flow here on the GEFS, but nonetheless, if we were to look at it sort of from a seasonal point of view or a weekly point of view on the CFS, you can see, right, even for example, the 2 to 3 week time frame, the warmer temperatures still remaining in the Gulf, and the cooler temperatures remaining up in the Midwest. These reds are looking a little deceiving. You might think, well, Brennan, that looks warm. Well, we're talking in retrospect to temperatures in the south, right? These are also relative to the climate normals for these areas. So just because it's slightly above normal in the Midwest doesn't mean that it's not going to be cold. That would actually imply that it is going to be cold. It's just going to be not below normal cold. Whereas the Gulf Coast states, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, are likely to be above normal throughout the month of February, at least for the most part. Now, Tom had a really good call out earlier in the Discord. He was talking about the idea that, hey, there still is the opportunity for another cold shot. We have to keep that in mind. And that's something I've advertised as well. We have to really watch. There still is the threat that exists for another cold blast to make its way across the south. But if we were to look at February on its own, what I'm forecasting for, and for the immediate future, continuing to forecast for, is the idea that we will see a reprieve from cold for the southern United States. Can't necessarily say the same for the Midwest, even though that first week of February is likely to be a blowtorch for a lot of the country. I think the most of the month, I'm still forecasting for a tale of two winters across the United States. And that is likely, I'll say possible, not likely, careful, I'll say possible for the first couple weeks of March. If you have any questions, be sure to comment those down in the video below. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy today's video. And like I said, if you haven't yet subscribed to Energy Rogue, you can head on over to energyrogue.com and see the latest on information as it relates to subscribing and getting signed up. And that way you can get access to our weather discussions and, of course, access to Brian and Bill on the energy and nat gas side. And with that, we will see you on Thursday with another weather discussion. Take care.